Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is a Thursday. And what we are going to do on Thursdays is we are going to have a deep conversation on our experience of reading Design Way. Design Way is one of the most complex books, or the most complex books that we have taken up to read. And on Mondays, we are going to go chapter by chapter. And on Thursdays, we are going to have these deep conversations where everybody gets to talk about how they are approaching the book. They can raise questions. We'll go one by one. I'll have a detailed conversation with anybody who wants to talk. It's a best way I know of internalizing this. This is enormously, I don't want to say complex. In some ways, I think it's simple, but it has multiple elements that are operative at the same time. And it's very easy for people to get fixated on one or the other and lose the whole context. So I think just having these conversations, deep conversations, will enable all of us to learn fastest. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to invite everybody to talk about, first question, has anybody finished the book? Has anybody read the whole book? If you have read the whole book, go ahead and type an exclamation mark or say yes. I have read the whole book, so I can say yes. But I have read it very, very fast. I've read it in just 4 days. Okay, so I'm the only person who has read the book. No, Mike has read the book? Okay, wonderful. I am impressed. But let's, so that's good to know. So you don't need to read the whole book. What we are trying to do is I'm trying to do this so that everybody can come along. The name of the book is The Design Way by Harold Nelson and Eric. Can you, Joe, can you put the name of the second author?
Eric Stalterman.
Eric Stalterman. Okay. It's like Harold Nelson is here, so I talk about him all the time. Eric Stalterman. My apologies, Eric, Mr. Eric Stalterman. All right. So what I want to do today is I want to talk to anybody who wants to talk about the book. I will talk to, and I will take the order. I will choose the order so that there is a good flow of conversation. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to talk about the book, your experience of reading the book. I want to do 2 things from my side. Number one, I want to talk about the order in which we are going through chapters. And I want to give you the reasons of why I want to do it in that order. And I want your feedback on that. So that's number one. And number two, towards the end, I'll give 3 ideas I will talk about 3 ideas that I got from my reading of the first tradition, the chapter that we are going to discuss on Monday. The purpose of that is to give a quick overview for people who have not read the chapter, or getting people excited about reading the chapter. Okay, and I will do that. That's going to be fairly short, and I will do that towards the end. So let me go ahead and do the warm-up by talking about the structure of the book. Okay. The idea that I'm using to understand the structure of the book comes from Marshall McLuhan and his idea of tetrads. He says that this is in his book called Laws of Media. He says every media or every tool has 4 different effects. Okay, and I'm going to present them in a certain order. Now, you have to realize that each concept is a tool, and think of this Design Way book as a tool, because that's what it is. So what is this tool doing? And Marshall McLuhan offers a really profound way of understanding any tool. He says, first thing a tool does is that it retrieves something valuable from the past. So what is this design way retrieving? Harold Nelson tells us directly, it's the first tradition. He's retrieving the first tradition. This is the tradition of human beings as designers, human beings as creators, creating something new, changing their own lives and the world. So it's the first tradition that is being retrieved in modern times. Okay, so that is retrieval. Now, how does it actually retrieve it? It does it, any tool does the retrieval by extending something, by making something more efficient, more powerful, larger. And what does this design tool extend? It extends integration. What has happened is that it comes at a time, this book is written at a time where the previous tool, that of analytical thinking, has produced certain effects. And this book is actually a response to that. And what it is extending is our ability to be more integrative. So it is the integration that it extends. The third part of the tetrad. So first one was retrieve. Second is extend. The third one is displace. What is it? Or he calls it obsolete. I use the term displace. What does it displace? It displaces this disintegrated way of thinking. So the integration displaces disintegrated way of thinking and operating and living. And the fourth one is called flip. I like to call it overextend. So if we overextend a tool, what effect does it have? So if we overextend design, if we get too much wrapped up in design and forget the entire context of our lives, what will happen to us? So there are a couple of things that happen. One is that there is a level of hubris that because I have designed it, that is it. So you're no longer responsive to the world. That's a danger. Second kind of flip that can happen is unintended consequences. You designed things with only certain amount of things. So one of the results of this book that we have to watch out for is to remain open to other ways of thinking about design. Okay, so that's the order that I see. Retrieval, extension, displacing, and flipping or overextending. And the general scheme of the book, what it is retrieving. So now I'm going into the details of the book. First, I was talking about its effect on the culture. Now I'm talking about how does this book actually do this? So what does it specifically retrieve? It is specifically retrieving a view of man as a designer, as a creator. That's what it is retrieving. Instead of being this one person who is a specialized person in a large structure that you don't understand and don't even want to understand, you are taking the responsibility of designing, being a designer. And that is being covered largely in chapter 5 and chapter 1. So that's the first, that's the fifth part of the book. Second, it goes to, how does Harold Nelson show us how to be a designer? What is the how? What is the efficient cause? And that is the entire chapter, entire part, which is the third part. It has 6 different tools, 6 different ways of building your design skills. That's the how. That, in some ways, is the meat of the book. but you can't really start using it without the first one. So your view of man as a design being, and then looking at how do you design. Now, both these are what Marshall McLuhan calls the figure. These are something that you can focus on very easily. Those are apparent, that's what you're getting. The other two are the ground. Those are the effects. Those are the context that are there, that are kind of subtly change. So what is it? Where does Harold Nelson talk about the displacing? And that he does in his topic, in his part on foundations, that's part 2, where he's replacing the current ideas of how we naturally think in these dichotomous ways with integrated concepts like the ultimate particular, or his concept of service, or systematics. All of these, or the whole, these are all about saying that the previous tool of analysis has disintegrated things. Here are concepts that will bring things together. So these are the concepts. That is in the function of those concepts is to displace the current concepts that most people use. And that is why it is hard for many people to grasp the book, because they continue to use the concepts, the analytical concepts that they are using, and they're trying to understand the book with that mental set. And that's not, you won't get it. You won't get too far on that. The last one is the question of overextension. And that's where, that is related to the final cause. When is it that design can produce bad impacts? What is it that you want to watch out for? What standards do you use to evaluate those things? And that is covered in part 5. Okay, so those are the 4 parts, mapped onto Marshall McLuhan's tetrads. And what I want to do is I want to go in that order, because I think we will be able to get a lot more value if we did it in that order. But I want everybody to be focused on all these 4 parts together. So I have designed these cycles. I have 4 cycles where you start with, for example, the first tradition. Then we take a chapter from the 3rd part. And that is, I have chosen, and I'm open to the choice here. I have chosen the chapter on composition, composing and connecting, because that just shows how these methods are different from analytical methods. The how is the how different? I think it does a fantastic job. In part 2, I will probably want to take the ultimate particular first, because it's the one that separates the products of design from other products, which talk about either material things dissociated from meanings, or ideas which are dissociated from implementation. Ultimate particular captures both of them together. So that's what I'm proposing as the first cycle. And in the part 4, I think splendor of design, of what is the value of design. So that's the first cycle, and then I have arguments for the other 4 cycles as well. So, but that's how I'm approaching the book. Now, we will discuss the chapters in this order,